What do you leave behind that no one can ever take away? Della Mercer was 58 years old, and by the second week of that hot summer, the whole of what she had left in the world came to $61.40, a widow's checkbook with a rubber band around it, and a ring of keys to a place 3 counties away that a bank appraiser had written down, in his own neat hand, as worth exactly 0, not low. 0, a dead drive-in theater on the flat edge of a town called Coldwater, a movie screen the size of a barn wall gone soft with rot, a gravel lot the weeds had been eating for years, and a marquee out front missing so many letters that it no longer spelled anything at all. That was the inheritance. That was what 34 years of marriage to a quiet man named Roy had come down to, once the lawyers and the long illness and the slow arithmetic of dying had taken their share. She had not driven out to keep it. She had driven out to sign it away, and to be gone by morning. There was already an offer on the table, folded in the glove box of her old sedan, typed on the letterhead of a development company from the city. A man named Prentice wanted the land for a strip mall, wanted to bulldoze the screen and the little booth and the leaning rows of speaker poles and pour a parking lot over the whole memory of it. He had offered her far less than the ground was worth and called it a kindness. A clean way out for a grieving woman with nothing. Roy's brother Vernon, who had not spoken a warm word to Roy in a decade, was suddenly full of advice about how she ought to take it and be grateful. So she meant to sign the papers, hand over the keys, and drive home to an apartment she could barely afford. And she meant to never think about the Starlight Drive-In again. Before we go any further into this, if a story about a discarded place and a discarded woman is the kind of story that stays with you, take a moment to subscribe and let us know down in the comments where in the world you are watching from tonight. It matters more than you might think, and you will understand why by the time the lamp goes back on. Because there was a lamp. That is the part the appraiser never wrote on his card, the part Vernon did not know, the part that would take Della the better part of 3 days and the whole weight of her late husband's secret life to finally understand. On the far side of that ruined lot, at the base of the tall screen tower, there was a single small window, and in that window a warm amber light was burning, steady and unbothered, in a building that had had its power shut off for years. Someone had kept a light on in a dead drive-in. And what Della would find in the room behind that glass would make an entire county remember a man that even his own wife thought she had known clear down to the bottom. The drive from the city took her most of the afternoon. She rolled the windows down because the sedan's air had quit the same winter Roy did, and the summer air came in smelling of cut hay and hot asphalt, and somewhere under it the green wet smell of things growing where no one was tending them. She had a photograph on the passenger seat, an old square print gone orange with age. In it a young man in a paper hat stood grinning in front of a marquee that still had all its letters, one arm slung around a projector taller than he was. On the back, in Roy's cramped pencil, it said only, "First night," and a date from a summer more than 30 years gone. She had found the photo in his sock drawer after the funeral. She had never seen it before. She had been married to the man in it for 34 years, and she could not have told you the first true thing about the place where the picture was taken. That was the thing that had been sitting on her chest since the wake. Not the money, though the money frightened her. Not the empty apartment. It was the growing suspicion that she had shared a bed and a table and a life with a man she had somehow never fully met. Roy had been the quiet one. The one who fixed the neighbors' furnaces without being asked and never mentioned it. The one who fell asleep in his chair with the newspaper folded to the crossword. The one whose answer to nearly every question was a slow nod and a longer silence. She had loved him. She was sure of that in the deep automatic way you are sure of the floor under your feet. But loving a man is not the same as knowing where he goes in the dark, and Roy, it turned out, had gone somewhere every night for most of their marriage and had never once told her the truth of what he did there. The turnoff came up on her without warning, marked by a sign so faded it was more suggestion than word. She slowed, signaled to an empty road out of 34 years of habit, and turned in. And then she was there, and she understood the appraiser's zero. The Starlight Drive-In had been dying for a long time before it finally died. The great screen tower stood at the back of the lot like the last wall of a burned cathedral. 3 stories of weathered white boards, streaked rust brown where the nails had wept down them for years, the top corner peeling away in long curls that lifted and settled in the wind. The lot in front of it was a slow green sea. Weeds had come up through every crack in the old asphalt, and then whole armies of them had marched out across the gravel, chest high in places seeded with wildflowers, purple and gold and a chicory blue, so that the ranks of low speaker poles stood up out of the growth like the masts of a drowned fleet, leaning every direction, most of their little speakers long gone. The concession stand in the middle was a squat cinder block ruin with the roof caving toward the sky. A single crow walked the top of it and looked at her without much interest. She got out of the car and stood in the tall grass and felt the disappointment settle over her like dust. This was it. This was the great secret her husband had kept. This was the thing worth driving 5 hours for. A pile of rot and rust in a field, appraised at nothing, wanted by no one except a man who wanted only to erase it. For one long minute she was closer to weeping than she had been at the funeral, because the funeral had been about losing Roy, and this was about learning that Roy had spent his hidden life on this, on ruin, on a screen that could not even hold a picture anymore. She almost got back in the car. She had the papers. She could sign them on the hood and mail them and be home before the worst of the dark. Prentice would have his lot. Vernon would stop calling. The Starlight would come down and be forgotten, and she could go on being a widow with $61 and no mystery to keep her up at night. That was when she saw the light. It was small, and the low sun was still bright enough that she almost missed it, but there was no missing it once she had, because it was wrong. Down at the base of the screen tower, tucked into the boards where the great white wall met the ground, there was a little room she had not noticed. A projection booth built into the foot of that tower, and its one square window was glowing. A warm, living, amber glow, the exact color of a reading lamp in a front room on a winter evening. It was the color of somebody being home. And it made no sense at all, because the power company had cut the service to this address years ago, and the man who might have paid the bill was 3 months in the ground. Della stood very still in the weeds. Her first clear thought was that someone had broken in, some drifter sheltering in the ruin, and that she ought to be afraid. But she was not afraid, and she noticed that she wasn't, and the not being afraid was somehow stranger than the light. Because the light did not look like trespass. It looked tended. It looked like it had been burning a long time and expected to go on burning, and it seemed, absurdly, to be waiting for her. She left the papers on the seat. She waded out through the wildflowers toward the tower, and the closer she came, the more the place stopped being a ruin and started being a room somebody had loved. There was a path worn through the weeds, she realized. A faint but real trail, beaten flat by feet, leading from the old entrance road straight to the booth door, as if someone still walked it. The speaker poles she passed were not all empty after all. Here and there a speaker still hung in its cradle, and someone had wound the frayed cords up neat and looped them over the posts, coiled like a garden hose that a person still meant to use. Somebody had been keeping this place. Somebody had been keeping it for years, in secret, while the world drove past on the highway and called it dead. The booth door was not locked. It was not even fully shut. It stood open a hand's width, and warm light lay across the weeds in a long yellow bar, and when Della put her palm flat against the wood and pushed, it swung inward on hinges that someone had recently oiled, without a sound. Inside, the little room was clean. That was the first thing. The impossible thing. The thing that stopped her breath in the doorway. Out there was a field of ruin, and in here was order. A narrow room, close and warm, smelling of machine oil and old paper, and, faintly, of the pipe tobacco Roy had given up before she ever met him. Along one wall stood the great projector, taller than she was. black iron and brass gone soft gold with polishing, its lens capped. A folded cloth laid over the top of it the way you would cover a sleeping child. On a shelf above it burned the lamp, an old brass kerosene lamp with a clean chimney and a trimmed wick, throwing its steady amber over everything. Someone had filled it. Someone filled it, she would learn, every single week. And on the far wall, floor to ceiling, were the reels, round flat cans of film stacked in wooden racks. Dozens of them, hundreds maybe, each one labeled on its edge in white grease pencil. But they were not marked with the titles of movies. Della stepped closer and closer and read them in the lamplight and felt the hair rise on her arms. They were labeled with the names of families. The Pruitt family. The Dolan boys. Ruth and her girls. Back row every Friday. The Sawyer place. Hard winter. And on, a wall of names, a wall of people, stacked and kept and dated in her dead husband's careful hand. She did not understand it yet. But she understood, standing there in the warm little room at the foot of the ruined screen, that she was not going to sign anything in the morning. She was not going to be gone by morning. Whatever Roy had done here, whatever this room was, it was not nothing. It was the furthest thing in the world from nothing. And she had married him and buried him and never known. She stayed the night. She had not planned to, and she never quite decided to. She simply looked up at some point, and the window had gone dark blue and then black, and the lamp was the only light for a mile, and going back out to the car to drive 5 hours home had become unthinkable. There was a cot in the corner of the booth, made up with a wool blanket, a little stiff but clean. There was a tin of crackers and a jar of instant coffee on the shelf, both of them fresh, both of them recently bought by someone who was not Roy, because Roy was gone. She lay down on her dead husband's cot in her dead husband's secret room, under the light he had somehow kept burning past his own death, and she did not sleep so much as lie awake and listen to the crickets in the great dark field and feel, for the first time since the funeral, that she was not entirely alone. In the morning she meant to find out who was filling the lamp. She did not have to wait long. She woke to the sound of boots in the gravel and sat up on the cot, with the blanket clutched to her chest, and through the open door she saw a man crossing the lot toward the booth, with a can of lamp oil in one hand and a paper sack in the other. He was somewhere in his late 30s, broad through the shoulders, in a mechanic's shirt with a name patch she could not read from where she sat, and he stopped dead when he saw her in the doorway, and the two of them stared at each other across the weeds like a pair of startled deer. "You're not supposed to be here," he said at last, and then, quickly, "Sorry, I mean. Nobody comes out here." "I own it," Della said. Her voice came out rougher than she meant. "My husband left it to me. Roy Mercer. I'm his wife. I'm his widow." Something moved across the man's face when she said the name, something that started as suspicion and ended, to her astonishment, as grief. He set the oil can down slowly in the weeds and took off his cap and stood there turning it in his hands. And when he spoke again, his voice had gone careful and low. "You're Della," he said. "You're Della. He talked about you. He never brought you out, but he talked about you." He shook his head slowly. "I'm sorry for your loss, ma'am. I want you to know Roy Mercer was the best man I ever knew, and I have been trying to figure out for 3 months how to keep his light on without anybody asking questions. And I guess I don't have to hide it from you, at least." "He talked about me?" Della said. "Out here. To you." "All the time, ma'am. He used to say his wife back in the city was the reason he ever understood what a person is really worth." Dean almost smiled. "I never did know what he meant by that. Standing here looking at you, I think I finally do." "He never once brought me," Della said. "In 34 years, not one time." "No," Dean said quietly. I don't expect he could have stood it, you seeing all this and him having to say out loud what it was. Some men can't be thanked. Mrs. It undoes them clean. His name was Dean. He came inside because she asked him to, and he filled the lamp because it was low, and while he worked he told her a piece of it, the piece he knew, which was only his own small corner of a thing that turned out to be enormous. He had been a boy in Coldwater, he said, back when the Starlight still ran. His father had been a drinker, and worse, and his mother had worked 2 jobs, and the summers had been long and frightening and lonely. And every Friday night, all through those summers, Roy had waved their rusted-out station wagon through the front gate without taking a dime, night after night, year after year, and had never once made his mother feel it as charity. He had a way of leaning in the window, Dean said, and saying the same thing every time, so that it felt like a favor she was doing him instead of the other way around. What did he say? Della asked. He'd say, "Come on in, we saved you the good spot." Dean's eyes had gone bright, and he blinked hard and dropped his eyes to the floor. Every time. "Come on in, we saved you the good spot." Like we were expected. Like we mattered to somebody. He put the cap of the oil can back on and screwed it down tight. I'm a grown man with a family of my own now, and I have thought about that sentence probably 10,000 times. There were nights that drive-in was the only safe place I had. And Roy knew it. He knew exactly what he was doing. He just never let on. Della sat down on the edge of the cot because her legs had stopped being reliable. "How many?" she said. "How many nights did he do that?" "For me? Every summer of my childhood. Near enough." No, she could hear her own heartbeat now. "How many people?" And Dean looked at her, and looked at the wall of reels labeled with the names of families, and then he looked at the great black projector under its folded cloth, and he said the thing that turned the morning over. "Ma'am," he said, "I only ever knew about me. But I'm not the only name on that wall, and I always figured if a man kept track of us all somewhere, he'd have kept it close." He nodded at the projector. He loved that machine more than anything on this earth except, he always said, one person he'd left back in the city. That was you. Whatever he wrote down, if he wrote it down, I'd look near the thing he loved. After Dean left for his shift at the garage, promising to come back that evening and, almost shyly, to bring his wife and his own 2 children who had never been allowed to see the place, Della stood alone in the booth for a long time and looked at the projector. Then she crossed to it and lifted the folded cloth away. And she began, gently, as carefully as a person searches the pockets of a coat that still smells of someone, to look. The projector was a great old thing of iron and brass, and behind it, bolted to the wall, were the film racks, and she started there, sliding the heavy cans out, one at a time, and reading their edges. The Pruitt family. The Dolan boys. Ruth and her girls, back row, every Friday. Each can, when she pried it open, held not film but ordinary things, a child's drawing folded small, a church bulletin, a pressed flower gone to paper, a birthday card, a photograph of people standing in front of the concession stand and laughing. Roy had not been storing movies. He had been storing evidence of the people who had come to watch them. Every reel on that wall was a family he had kept, and inside each one he had saved some small proof that they had been happy here, on his gravel, under his light. She was 3 racks deep and weeping, without noticing it when she found the reel at the very end of the very bottom row, larger than the others, its can heavier, its label reading only, in Roy's pencil, the last picture, "Don't ever take this one down." She could not get it open with her hands. The lid had been sealed with a ring of tape gone brittle and brown with age. She worked it loose with a screwdriver from the shelf, hardly breathing, and when the lid finally came free, she found that this can, alone of all of them, did hold film, a single fat reel of it, coiled dark and heavy. And tucked into the center of the coil, wrapped in oilcloth against the damp, was a stack of ledgers. There were 4 of them, green cloth boards worn pale at the corners, the kind of ledger a small shopkeeper keeps, and they were full, every one, front to back, in Roy's cramped and careful pencil. Della carried them to the cot and sat down under the lamp and opened the first. And the first page was dated a summer more than 30 years gone. The same summer as the photograph in her car, the first night, and at the top of the page, Roy had written a single line, underlined once, as a heading for everything that followed. It read, "No one watches alone." And below it, the columns began. A date. A name, or sometimes only a description when he had not known the name, the woman with the twins, the old fellow from the feed store, the family in the blue truck who don't say much, the number in the car, and then, in the last column, the price, and next to nearly every entry the same 2 small letters, over and over, an N and a C, hundreds of them, thousands, running down page after page after page for 30 years. Della did not understand the letters at first. She thought they might be initials, or a code for a kind of ticket. It was Dean who told her that evening, when he came back as promised with his family hanging shy in the doorway, what they meant. He looked at one page for about 4 seconds, and his jaw went tight. "No charge," he said quietly. "NC. No charge." That's what he wrote every time he let somebody in for free. He turned a few pages with one finger, gentle as if the paper might bruise. Look how many." They looked. They counted the first page, and it was more than half. They counted a page from a hard winter, and it was nearly all of it. Roy Mercer had run the Starlight Drive-In for 30 years, and for 30 years he had waved car after car after car through his gate for nothing, and he had written down every single one, not as money lost, but as a life let in. Widows, laid-off men from the mill the year it closed. The Sawyer place after the fire. Ruth and the girls after her own husband ran off, every Friday, back row for 11 years. And beside each one, that steady little pair of letters, the same small mercy repeated until it filled 4 books. No charge. No charge. Nobody, on Roy Mercer's gravel, ever had to watch alone. Stay with this, because the next thing Della learned is the thing that turns a sad story into something else entirely, and if you have ever wondered whether a quiet life could add up to anything at all, this is the part that answers it. Word travels in a small town faster than a car can drive it. By the 3rd day, without Della saying much to anyone, Coldwater knew that Roy Mercer's widow was out at the Starlight, and Coldwater began to come. They came as people come to a wake, a few at a time, hats in hand. An old woman named Ruth, who ran the diner on the county road, and whose reel sat near the top of that wall, came out and stood among the flowers and cried and could not say why for a while, and then she said it. Her husband had left her with 3 girls and no money the year the mill first started laying men off, and there had been exactly one thing in that whole black stretch of her life that had cost her nothing and had felt like being cared for. And it was a man in a paper hat waving her rusty car through a gate on Friday nights and telling her the back row was hers. She had never thanked him. She had assumed, she said, that he owned the place free and clear and could afford the generosity, and it had never once occurred to her that Roy Mercer had been quietly buying every one of those free nights out of his own thin pocket for 30 years, writing the cost down as no charge, taking the loss so that a broke woman with 3 scared girls could feel, for 2 hours in the dark, like the world had a place saved for her. They all had a version of it. One of the Dolan boys, gray in his beard now, stood with his hat crushed in both hands. The summer our dad was dying, he said, Roy let us in every Friday and told us the projector got lonesome without an audience. Said we'd be doing him the favor. I was 12 years old. I believed him. And you know what? I still do. A retired schoolteacher remembered a winter her furnace quit. He ran the whole picture just for me, she said. one car in the lot, snow coming down sideways, and he made me cocoa on that little hot plate and would not take a nickel for it. I asked him why on earth he bothered. He said a picture is no good watched cold and alone, and that was every word I ever got out of him about it. Man after man, woman after woman, stood in that overgrown lot and told Della the same shape of story. The story of the one place in a hard county that had never once asked them what they could pay. And Della, who had thought she was burying a quiet man who fixed furnaces, began to understand that she had been married to something rarer than she had words for. A man who had decided, young and without telling anyone, that no matter what the world charged for everything else, one small square of it under one modest light was going to be free. That was why the lamp. Roy had explained it, in his own hand, in the front of the fourth ledger, and Dean read it aloud one evening with his voice cracking, while the crickets started up in the field. I keep the lamp lit in the window every night we run, and every night we don't, Roy had written, so that anybody driving past who's got nowhere else and no coin in their pocket will know the gate's open and the seat's paid for. A locked place says stay out. A dark place says nobody's home. But a light in a window says come on, we've been waiting for you. That's the whole business. That's the only thing I ever meant to sell here, and I always gave it away. For a moment nobody in the booth said anything. Then Ruth put her hand flat against the boards of the wall, the boards the appraiser had called worthless, and she said, "That's the richest man I ever knew," and no one argued. There was more in the booth, and each thing Della found opened a wider door than the one before it. Under the shelf that held the lamp she found an old candy tin, the painted kind, and when she worked the lid off she expected coins, some hidden till, some small hoard at last. Instead, the tin was packed tight with paper tickets, hundreds of them, the little red stubs a theater tears in half at the gate, and every one of them was whole. Uncollected, Roy had printed tickets or bought them as any operator would, and then, night after night, he had simply never torn them, had waved the cars past the box where the tickets should have gone, and had dropped the untorn stubs into the tin instead, as if he could not quite bring himself to charge, but could not quite let go of the record of how many times he had chosen not to. She was still holding the tin when Dean's youngest, a girl of about 7, tugged her grandmother Ruth's sleeve and asked, in the plain way children ask the enormous questions, why didn't he just take the money? Everybody takes the money. The whole booth went quiet, because it was the question, the one none of the grown people had let themselves say out loud, and it was Dean who crouched down to his daughter's height and answered it. Because he figured somebody had to be the one place that didn't, he said. Your whole life, baby, near everywhere you go, there's a handout wanting to be paid before you're allowed to feel good. Roy decided there ought to be one gate in the world that just opened. That's all. He wasn't rich, and he wasn't foolish. He just did the math different than the bank does it. How'd he do the math? The girl asked. Dean looked up at the wall of family names, and at the tin of tickets never torn, and he said, he counted the people, honey. He never counted the money at all. He only ever counted the people. Della had to step outside after that, out into the tall wildflowers under the wide summer sky, because the thing in her chest had gotten too big to hold in a small room. And standing out there in the weeds she noticed, for once, the little details the booth had been quietly telling her all along, and she had been too stunned to read. There were 2 chairs in the booth, not one, an old kitchen chair, drawn up beside Roy's stool, though the man was said to have worked alone. There were 3 coffee mugs on the shelf. There was a second, softer blanket folded under the cot, sized for a child. Roy had never worked that projector alone at all. He had kept the seat beside him open the same as he kept the gate open, for whatever tired soul wandered in out of the dark, needing an hour of somewhere to be. And the county had been walking that worn path to his door for 3 decades, and his own wife, 5 hours away in the city, had thought he was asleep in his chair with the crossword. She went back in and read another hour, and the rehook of it, the thing that kept her turning pages past midnight, was simple and merciless, Every entry answered one small question and asked a larger one. Who was the family in the blue truck who don't say much? Why did the Sawyer reel have a scorch mark on the can? What happened to Ruth's middle girl, whose name stopped appearing after a certain autumn? Roy had written down the town, but a ledger only tells you that a thing happened, never all of what it meant, and Della understood she could spend the rest of her life out here reading the arithmetic of her husband's kindness and never reach the bottom of it. And she found, to her own great surprise, that this did not frighten her. It felt, after a lifetime of not quite knowing the man, like finally being invited fully in. One entry she did chase to its ending. The Sawyer place, hard winter, and beside it, over 3 separate seasons, the small letters and then a line she had not seen anywhere else in 4 books, brought the boy, sat him up front, gave him my coat. She asked Ruth about it, and Ruth's face folded, and Ruth told her. The Sawyers had lost their farmhouse to a fire one January, mother and father and a boy of 9, and for the whole of that black winter they had lived in their truck and the one warm-lit place that never asked them to move along, that never asked them for anything, was a drive-in that had no earthly reason to be running a picture in the snow for a single frozen family. Roy had run it anyway. He had run the projector for an audience of 3 in a parking lot full of drifts, and he had sat the boy up in the booth where the machine threw its heat, and he had given the child the coat off his own back, and had written it down not as a loss but as a night's work well done. That boy, Ruth said, and her voice had gone to gravel. You want to know what became of that boy Roy kept warm? He's a fireman now, 2 towns over, runs into the burning one so other families don't lose theirs. I asked him once why he chose it. She wiped her eyes with the flat of her hand. He said a man kept a light on for him in the worst winter of his life, and he'd spent the rest of it trying to be that light for somebody else. He didn't even remember Roy's name. He just remembered the light, and the coat, and being let in. Della wrote the fireman's name down in her new ledger that night, though he owed the Starlight nothing and would likely never come. Because it seemed to her that he belonged in the book more than almost anyone, being proof of the one thing the appraiser's 0 could never measure, that a small warmth handed to a cold child does not stop when the child grows. It travels. It goes out into the dark county and lights other windows, for years, for a lifetime, long after the man who struck the first match has laid down his pencil for the last time. On the 4th evening, with the ledgers spread open on the cot, Della finally said the thing out loud that she had been circling for days. Everybody keeps telling me I can't keep this place, she said. The taxes. The repairs. I have $61, Dean. Maybe they're right. Dean was quiet a moment. Can I ask you something? What did Roy tell you about the Starlight? All those years. Nothing, that's the terrible part. He told me nothing. No, ma'am. He told you everything, he just did it without any words. You said he fixed the neighbors' furnaces and never mentioned it. You said he did the crossword and dozed off in that chair of his. That was him resting up. A man doesn't drive out here every night of his life for a field of weeds. He drove out here for us. And now he's handed the whole of it to you, and you're sitting here asking me if you ought to give it away. I'm asking if I can afford it. Ruth spoke up from the doorway, where she had been listening without a word. Honey, that's the wrong question, and I'd know, because I asked it my whole life. Roy never once asked whether he could afford it. She came in and sat down heavy on the kitchen chair, the second chair, Roy's chair. You want to know what it costs to keep a lamp burning in a window? I'll tell you. It costs exactly whatever you've got every single time. That is the entire trick of the thing. He never had $1 more than he needed either. He just spent his different than the rest of us. On strangers, Della said. On people, Ruth said, and her voice was fierce now. There's a world of difference in that, and your husband knew it. Some men stand up and brag about the good they do. Roy kept books nobody was ever meant to read, and let the whole county think he was nothing but the quiet fellow in the paper hat. You've got a choice in front of you that he already made about 1,000 times. You can add it up like the bank does and lose. Or you can count it like Roy did, and you will never come up short a day in your life. Della looked at the 4 green ledgers and at the tin of tickets never torn, and she did not answer Ruth out loud. But she stopped talking about the taxes after that. But a light in a window can be seen from the road by anyone, and not everyone who drives past is looking for a place saved for them. Some are looking for land. The silver truck came on the 5th day. Della was up on a ladder, oiling the hinge of the great window when she heard it crunch onto the gravel, and she looked down and saw the developer, Prentice, step out in his pressed shirt with a rolled set of plans under his arm, and behind him, easing out of the passenger side with the sheepish face of a man who has been caught somewhere he told himself he had a right to be, came Roy's brother Vernon. Mrs. Mercer. Prentice had a smile that never reached higher than his mouth. I'd about given up on you. You never signed. I've got the demolition crew scheduled for Monday, so this is good timing, us catching you out here. We can settle it right now. There's nothing to settle, Della said. She came down the ladder slowly. It's not for sale anymore. Vernon started forward, hands already spread in the old familiar gesture of a man about to explain to a woman what was good for her. Della, now, be reasonable. This is a junkyard. Roy poured his whole life into a field of weeds and left you broke doing it. God rest him, and this gentleman is offering you a clean start. What in the world do you think you're going to do with a dead drive-in? Keep the light on, Della said. Prentice laughed, a short flat sound. With what? You've got, what, $60? The taxes alone on this parcel will bury you inside a year, and then the county takes it, and then I buy it from the county for less than I'm offering you today. I'm the only exit you have, and I'm being generous because I'm a nice man. Sign, and drive home rich. Don't, and lose it all for nothing. He unrolled the plans across the hood of his truck, a bright rendering of a parking lot and a row of chain stores where the screen now stood. Monday morning, that screen comes down either way. Question is whether you get paid for it. And here is the thing the developer did not know, and Vernon did not know, and Della herself had not known until she had spent 5 days reading a dead man's careful pencil clear to the last page. Because Roy Mercer had been a quiet man. But a quiet man is not the same as a careless one, and on the final leaf of that last book, folded and pressed flat, was a document with the county seal on it, and Della had already read it 4 times. She did not raise her voice. She walked to her sedan and took a folder from the seat and walked back and laid a single page down on top of Prentice's shining rendering of his parking lot. My husband filed this with the county 11 years ago, she said. It's a preservation covenant. He put the starlight on the local historic register the same year the mill closed, because he figured someday a man exactly like you would come out here with a rolled-up drawing and a scheduled crew, and he wanted to be standing in the road when you did, even if he had to do it from the grave. She tapped the page. You can't demolish a registered historic structure without a hearing, and a hearing means public notice, and public notice in a town like this means every single person whose family is on that wall in there is going to stand up in the meeting hall and tell the county exactly what this junkyard was worth to them. You're welcome to try it. I'd sell tickets. Except that here, nobody's ever had to pay. The lot had gone very quiet, and then Della realized it was not quiet at all, because while Prentice had been talking, the cars had been arriving, easing one by one onto the gravel as they must have eased in on 100 Friday nights, and the people of Coldwater were getting out and walking up through the wildflowers and taking their places in a loose wide half-circle behind her. Ruth, Dean and his wife, and his children. The Dolan boys. The schoolteacher. Family after family off the wall, standing in the weeds in the evening light, not saying a word, just there, just present, The way Roy had taught a whole town that being present was the entire point. Prentice looked at the page, and then at the crowd, and then at Vernon, who had gone the gray of a man who has bet on the wrong brother. Then he rolled up his bright, useless drawing, and got in his silver truck and drove it back down the road he came in on, and the Starlight Drive-In was saved. Not by money, and not by anger, but by the plain unpayable arithmetic of what one quiet man had given away for 30 years, finally added up in front of everyone. Vernon lingered a moment, working his mouth. "I didn't know," he said finally, to no one, to the weeds, "about any of this. He never told me either." And that, Della thought, was the truest and saddest thing her brother-in-law had ever said, because it was the whole tragedy of a man like Roy. In a single sentence, he never told anybody. He just kept the light on and wrote it down as nothing and let the good he did stay a secret even from the people who should have loved him for it. But there was one secret left, and it was hers, and she had been saving it. That night, when the cars had gone and the field was dark and Dean had filled the lamp one last time and gone home to his family, Della sat alone under the light with the first ledger open on her knees, the one dated to that first summer 34 years gone. She had read the whole of it once already, but she had not, until now, gone back to the very first page and read the very first entry, the one that started everything, dated the same night as the photograph in her car, the first night. And there, at the top of the first column, above 30 years of strangers, in the very first line Roy Mercer ever wrote in that book, before the mill closed, before Dean was born, before any of the town he would carry, was a single name and a single car, and beside it those same two small letters. The name was hers. A young woman, alone, blue coupe, the entry read. Came for the late show, stayed for both. And then, where every other line in 4 books carried only the flat pencil letters N and C, this one, this first one, Roy had allowed himself one private extravagance. Beside the no charge he had added 3 more words, pressed hard enough into the paper that she could feel the ghost of them on the back of the page 30, 4 years later. Beside her name, on the night they met, on the night he let a lonely stranger through his gate for free, without either of them knowing it was the start of everything, Roy had written, "Worth the whole house." Della sat in the amber light with her husband's first ledger open on her knees and understood, at last and all at once, the thing he had been telling her without words for 34 years, and had not once said out loud. He had not kept the light on for the town. Or he had, but that was not the beginning of it. He had done it because one night a young woman with no money and nowhere to be had driven a blue coupe through his gate, and he had waved her in for nothing, and she had turned out to be the most valuable thing that ever crossed that lot, and he had spent the rest of his life keeping a gate open in the dark on the off chance that somebody else out there was, to somebody, worth the whole house too. "You could have told me," she said aloud, to the empty booth, to the lamp, to the man who was no longer there to answer. 34 years, Roy, one word. You could have brought me out here just once and let me see it. She pressed her hand flat to the open book. But you never wanted a single soul to see what it cost you. That was the whole point, wasn't it? You gave it away so quiet that even your own wife never once caught you doing it. She laughed then, a wet and broken little sound in the still room. You old fool. All this time I thought you were the plain one. I thought I was the one who'd married down. She thought that was the end of it. She was wrong, because a man that careful does not stop at one secret. And pressed into the very back of the 4th ledger, behind the covenant, was one more thing she had somehow skipped, a plain sealed envelope, soft with handling, and across the front in Roy's pencil it said, for Della, when the time comes. She will know when. She sat with it in her lap for a long while under the lamp, turning it over, afraid of it, because she understood that whatever her husband had written on the day he sealed this was the last thing he would ever say to her, and once she read it there would be no more of him left to find. In the end she did not open it that night. She has not told anyone what she decided about it, and that is her business, and there is a kind of love that stays a sealed envelope on purpose, kept back against the day you need it most, and Roy of all men would have understood a light you keep in reserve. But the covenant she did use, and the reels she did keep, and the light she absolutely did not let go dark. It took the town most of the rest of that summer. Dean and the men from the mill families rebuilt the screen tower board by board, and would not take a dime for it, which made Della laugh through her tears, because of course they wouldn't. They had learned from the man who taught the whole county that some things are not for sale. Ruth organized the concession stand and stocked it, and put a hand-lettered sign over the window that read, plainly, "Pay if you can, and if you can't, come on in anyway. The good spots are still open." The retired schoolteacher tracked down a projectionist 2 towns over who knew the old machines. And on the first cool Friday of the fall, the Starlight Drive-In showed a picture for the first time in years, the very reel Roy had labeled the last picture, "Don't ever take this one down," and the lot that the bank had appraised at 0 filled up, car after car after car, headlights easing in over the gravel exactly as they had a lifetime before. Della stood at the gate that night in Roy's own paper hat, and she waved them through. Every one, and to the ones she knew were struggling, the young mother with the tired eyes, the laid-off man staring straight ahead, she leaned in the window and told them what her husband had told a frightened town for 30 years. "Come on in," she would say. "Your seat's paid for, and we were hoping you'd turn up. Pull on up front. There's room." And she wrote each of them down in a fresh green ledger she had bought at the shop in town, a new first page under a new first heading, and beside the ones who had nothing she pressed her pencil down and wrote the same small pencil marks Roy had set down 10,000 times. Because the ledger was open again, and the arithmetic of it went on. If you have made it this far into Roy Mercer's story, then you already understand the thing the appraiser with his neat pencil never could, and it is worth saying plainly, once, out loud. The most valuable thing a person can own is not the money in the drawer, or the price on the land, or anything a stranger with a rolled-up drawing can offer to buy. It is the quiet good you have done for someone who could never pay you back, written down nowhere the world can see, adding up in the dark year after year, until the day it stands up all at once in a weedy lot and turns out to be worth more than every parking lot ever poured. A discarded place, it turns out, can be secretly full. And so, it turns out, can a discarded woman. They kept the lamp. Of course they kept the lamp. Every night the starlight runs, and every night it doesn't, someone fills the old brass lamp and sets it burning in the window at the foot of the great screen, so that anyone driving the dark county road with nowhere to go and nothing in their pocket can see that one warm square of light and understand, without a word, that the gate is open and the seat is paid for, and there is a place in this world where nobody has to sit in the dark by themselves. Della sees to it now. And when her time comes, Dean will, and after Dean his children, because that is how a light like that gets kept, handed down, one careful hand to the next, longer than any of the people who carry it. That is the whole business. That is the only thing Roy Mercer ever meant to sell out there, and he gave it away every single night for 30 years now. And it saved his widow, and it saved his town, and in the end it is the one thing that no lawyer and no illness and no developer with a scheduled crew was ever able to take away from him. So here is the question the Starlight leaves you with tonight, and I would truly like your answer in the comments below. When your own accounting is finally read, would you rather be remembered for the price you charged the world, or for the seats you quietly saved for the people who could not pay? Think about the lamp you have maybe been meaning to put in some window, for somebody. And if you have one, light it anyway. Thank you for spending this evening at the Starlight with Della and Roy. If this story warmed something in you, take a moment to subscribe, because we tell a quiet one like this every week. And before you go, let us know down in the comments where in the world you are watching from tonight, and leave the good spot open for whoever pulls in after you. The lamp stays lit. The gate is not locked. It never was.